Hello and good afternoon. I'm Abbas Kazerounian here with the Advanced Resolution Management podcast and YouTube channel. We are very, very lucky today. We have got none other than Judge Jennifer Togliatti and Paul Haire here to discuss COVID and post-COVID ADR. Thanks for being here, guys.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Okay, so ARM, Advanced Resolution Management, pursuant to the governor's orders, did a somewhat of a soft opening where we're beginning to go back towards in-person alternative dispute resolution on May 13th. And even though, we're doing that pursuant to obviously the governor's orders and the fact that a lot of litigators are still trying to really get in-person meetings with neutrals, the health and safety has to be our top priority at ARM. And, I personally, as one of the management, have left it to the absolute discretion of the neutrals whether they want to even partake in in-person ADR, and of course the parties. And we're offering in-person and hybrid or still virtual, because if people want to continue to do virtual, we're open to do that. And so, having said that, if people do want to partake in in-person ADR, we have some mandatory guidelines that our clients would have to adhere to. So, Jennifer, would you like to kind of start about what these protocols are? And, Paul, feel free to join in and discuss them and why we think they may be relevant and important.
Okay. Well, I think it's important to realize that I think, your team did a great job, Abbas, in trying to come up with a plan that gives an opportunity for all of us to be safe, but that also allows for those special cases where maybe you might believe that in-person is really crucial for your case. And so I think, you started with the visitors, neutrals, and staff being required to wear masks. I think that's obviously consistent with CDC guidelines and appropriate. I think you provide a certain level of comfort when you are going to be taking temperature during check-in with a touchless thermometer. The social distancing that the CDC recommends is also appropriate. This office is certainly large enough to accommodate social distancing in an in-person mediation where you have quite a few very large rooms that will allow for that. There is hand sanitizer and hand washing available throughout the day and throughout the mediation. Exceptional efforts to make, one of the things I've heard repeatedly throughout my mediations on virtual is how much the lawyers miss the lunch. And so I think it's pretty important that, that their lunches will still be a consideration, their quality of life while they're here. But it's going to have to be in a different way. And it's going to have to involve individual lunches that will be provided and not a buffet style. I know there's a few other items that Paul might want to talk about.
Yeah, so while Judge Togliatti was speaking, she mentioned something that prompts me to just reiterate. ARM is ideally suited for these social distancing requirements that the government and ourselves have imposed. It's such an open floor plan that it allows us to move around people at the 6-foot distance. We have various size conference rooms, as was mentioned, and I believe, Abbas, that we're going to limit our mediations to those that provide the most space so that we can create that distancing. Some of our conference rooms are too small to realize that, and so they won't be utilized. However, we'll also continue, and this may be a topic for later in our podcast, but continue to use aspects of virtual or remote video conference mediations. So, yeah, we have that very large open area, and because that is a central point in the office and a congregating point, we're going to have to be vigilant and sort of recognizing we have social distance concerns. So the kitchen area is going to be relegated simply to coffee, soda, water like that, and with our discouraging groups of people congregating, probably even at the 6-foot distance mark in that area, so as to avoid any temptation people might have towards going back to a state of normal before we're actually ready for that. And then, of course, handshaking. This is very, it comes very naturally for us, particularly me. And I have had to learn that that's simply not going to be possible in this age of coronavirus. So there'll be no handshaking at ARM until further notice, I guess.
That's somewhat counterintuitive to the ADR process, huh?
It is. It very much is. And so it presents a new challenge for us neutrals, though, to establish that bond, that rapport, if you will, with something other than a personal bodily contact with somebody.
Yeah, and you know, and I think the only one other thing that I would add to the list that you guys have provided is that we do require a waiver for people to enter the building, and you know, that's like obviously there is potential liability, and we're all lawyers, and I think we can understand that. But the remainder of the policies that you guys went through are really for the benefit of everybody, the neutrals and our clients. And so if in-person is something that our clients are looking to do, we are still trying to look after everybody's health and safety as a priority above everything else. And so with that said, before we get into how that's going to play out, how have you both found, because I know you've both been very busy in doing some virtual mediations, and I think you may have even done a virtual arbitration, Paul.
I have, yes.
How have you found the virtual experience from the neutral's perspective?
Is that question directed to me or?
To begin with, yes, but I'm going to pass that on to Jen after you've answered.
So you and I had a before these before the rules went into place that we were previously operating under, and I expressed to you some concern that we were going to be able to accomplish what we seek to accomplish as neutrals in mediation processes in particular, and that is that rapport that comes from proximity to someone and in-person mediations. And I had some concerns that we wouldn't be able to recognize that part of what we do as well. I have come full circle. I have moved 180 degrees. I think it just takes one good experience and maybe a couple of bad ones in that good experience to sort of teach us what are the things that we want to avoid and learn from. I have been pleasantly surprised at how counsel and the parties have been very they've been very workable. They've been very gracious in how we've conducted these, both in terms of arbitrations and mediations. They've been very accommodating. That's the word I was searching for. Recognizing that technical glitches would come up and so forth, and they have, but they've been sparse in my experience. And it's actually been good. I've warned some attorneys, Abbas, that not to get too comfortable with this. That we're still looking forward to getting back to doing these in person.
What about you, Jen?
Well, I think you know, when we talked about virtual mediations at the beginning, I thought, oh no, so lawyers will be able to mute me. That's not something I want to hear. But it turns out that I think it's worked out remarkably well. Again, just as Paul says, occasionally a client can't figure out what, you know, you'll get a face, but you don't have the sound. You have the sound, but you don't have the face. Right. You know, that's what we have staff here for. I mean, 3 days in a row, I've had a client of a lawyer that had a little bit of trouble with the getting the audio up. And all it took was a phone call with a case manager, and we were up and running in like 4 minutes. So it's been remarkable, I think. And I had the same kind of hesitancy as Paul did, just because what we do is so personal, right? And so, on the, this has its own level of personal, you're in somebody's house sometimes. And, you see their, kids' pictures in the background. And, I once had a client, a litigant, we were waiting for the attorney who had to step out and make a phone call. And she had these beautiful plants in her home, and she took me on a tour of her house. We had time to kill, and, that made it more personal. So I think it's worked out really, really well. It's not without some cases that have a little bit of difficulty, but overall, I've been converted in my view, for sure.
So, yeah. Before we get into the arbitrations, I just want to I guess one of the reasons as a litigant myself, when I'm going to mediation, I really want the adjuster or the decision maker for the other side to be there, because, when the time comes in the process, you need the mediator to go in and have that, had that certain conversation, call it a come to Jesus moment or whatever. That particular conversation, how, do you think that takes away from that particular, in-person effect of doing it over, the internet, virtually, as, when you had that person in the room and, having that conversation with them?
Speaking for myself, yeah, I think that we did suffer some connection there with parties, but let me just say that we've made up for some of the deficiencies with some advantages associated with remote mediations, and Jen alluded to one of them, and that is getting to see people in their natural environment, their native environment, if you will, and using that to establish sort of that affective connection with people, using things that are in the background, being introduced to people's children, which I've had the pleasure of doing a few times. But I think there is a genuine awareness that this is what must be. I had a party remind me, a member of the United States Marine Corps, improvise, adapt, and overcome is a statement that's often heard in the Marine Corps. And he reminded me of that, and I've reminded myself throughout that we just adapt to the situation. But connecting with principals has not been as much of a problem as I thought it would be. The attorneys are the attorneys, and they're, of course, used to this day in and day out. I have found that virtual mediation has truncated sort of my opening comments. Those tend to get pared down to the most important concepts, and so it's created an efficiency in my mediations.
Interesting. And what about you, Jen?
Well, I think I have found that a majority of the adjusters that I've been working with, I guess when I log into a room, I'm always relieved to see both video and audio. Yeah. Because the participants can choose, right? And so, you might think, well, an adjuster, it's not their first rodeo, it's their 1,000th rodeo, and they might not feel the need to come in on video. But I mean, facial expressions, body language, all of that has meaning. And when you're on video, you don't lose that. It's there. Yeah. And so I've been pleasantly surprised that I've only had I would say less than a handful that didn't use the video. And interestingly, the one in particular adjuster that I can recall over the last 8 weeks or so, 6 weeks, that doesn't use the video, he's been with me many times. We've worked together many, many times. So I feel like at that point I can hear him and I know what his face looks like. So in that regard, I think we've been, and I don't know if Paul's experience is the same, but I've been very lucky. And I think the adjusters, I've been surprised that they want to be there video and audio. And even if they click off while I'm not in the room, I've noticed I'll come back in the room and they put their video and audio back up. Very cool. And I think that makes a difference. It really does.
So last week, I was taking a virtual deposition and I showed up in my shirt and tie, and the defense attorney showed up in his t-shirt. He sees me and then suddenly he goes, "Oh, hold on a second," runs off and puts on a shirt over the t-shirt and comes back. So have you been So I've got a two-tiered question for you. Have you been finding that these virtual ADR sessions are becoming less formal because people are just not getting dressed up for the occasion? And if so, is that taken away from how serious they're taking the process?
So let me just say, I only have one standing requirement, and you have to assure me that you're at least wearing pants. Past that, I don't care. I've never been bothered by how someone is dressed. I think it adds to the decorum, if you will, if you do dress up. But I haven't seen any degradation in the seriousness of these and the diligence in which people are working towards trying to resolve cases. I always dress as I'm dressed today for my mediations and arbitrations, and that's what.
By the way, this is how Paul goes to the gym.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. This is how I go to bed. I wear a shirt and tie. So you've caused me to completely lose my train of thought.
Sorry.
I'm going to turn it over to Judge Togliatti.
I'm a bad person. I'm sorry. Totally.
I think, I think this process, and again, it's refreshing to me to be able to say these things because they're all things I didn't anticipate. I think this process has brought a whole new level of, of a personal nature to be able to, joke around with someone, their dog barks, or, I had a mediation. It went late into the night beyond where we thought we, would go. It was an 8 p.m. deal. And I remember saying to the adjuster, well, now you can toast, I'm sure you have I joked around and said, I'm sure you have a bottle of wine in your kitchen, because she was in her kitchen. And she literally, without a beat, pulls up a glass and shows me that she's already celebrating.
Yeah.
And so, funny things like that, you're not going to have the opportunity to do here. So it's like, the glass is half full, pardon the pun.
Yeah.
In any time you're doing something different, people find a way to make the best of it. And I've found that people are pretty respectful of the process. Lawyers want their clients to know they're taking it seriously, and they're dressing, at least in my experience, wearing appropriate business attire, at least from the waist up.
Yeah, I've had a few of those scenarios. So I think the efficacy of the virtual system, the proof's in the pudding in like what kind of results we're getting. And I can talk about the institutional kind of like overall results that we're getting, but I'm kind of curious. Are you finding yourselves that the results, meaning in settlements, are you finding that it's a little bit below the settlement rates that you were getting pre-COVID? Or do you think it's about the same, or do you think it's better?
I would say this. I would say that in the limited time that we're talking about, I have not seen a significant difference in valuations related to personal injuries. What I have seen is I have seen some business matters, perhaps cases with figure SIRs, and so it's issues of corporate money being comfortable with a prolonged process.
Of course, that makes sense. What about you, Paul?
Yeah, I echo what Judge Togliatti says about valuations, plaintiff versus defendant. As far as success or settlement rates, I haven't seen any difference. I will say this, though, that I have found that doing these remotely has prompted me to do even more advanced work in the lead up to the mediation, reaching out and talking to the lawyers, even more than I normally do anyway, just so that I can, again, take advantage of that efficiency, which is sort of driven by the virtual process. And then there may be a couple of cases that fall in that class where you need a day or two, and this is where my commercial or business related cases come into play. One most recently, I had international clients and sort of the sensibilities can be different. Europeans versus those located elsewhere in the world, and we had to process those, and we couldn't do it on the day of. Those just had to happen over a day or two to solidify the agreement.
I see. I mean, I can tell you, as an institution, with all the neutrals, I would say that the first 6 weeks we were actually higher on settlement if you took the previous 6 weeks, per capita on the number of, if you did an average of settlements in percentages based upon the number we did. And then we had a bit of a dip 2 weeks ago, and then we're back on the rise again. But now, if you look at it over the kind of 8-9 week period we've been virtual, it's almost identical, which I think is interesting. I mean, like variance of 1 or 2 points each way, and it's either up or down. But I mean, I find that fascinating. And one thing we forgot to talk about, I'm skipping a little bit. I want to go back, Paul. How was your virtual arbitration experience?
So that went really well. We had fairly sophisticated parties. We didn't have any technical issues. If there were any, they were of my own doing. Because our neutrals at ARM have different styles and methods of doing things. For example, in my mediations, almost invariably, there are no joint caucusing. There's only separate caucusing. Arbitration, of course, connotes a joint caucus. And so having everybody in one place and then in one room, and then people joining that room from other places, when you have plaintiff, defendant, expert witnesses, before and after witnesses, and so forth, who are joining in the room at different times. And so there was some interruptions and some delays and so forth. But really, everyone just took it in stride, and it turned out really, really well. And I think it prompted the lawyers to be more efficient in their questioning, and it affected the length of their closing arguments as well.
Wow. Yeah. And did they keep a record? Like, did they have a stenographer that was also on?
And none of the ones that I've done was that the case.
Okay. And Jen, can you see that translating to like bench trials, for example, or evidentiary hearings into the court system?
I don't see. Well, first of all, obviously, the court rules will control, but I think that there's nothing that limits. I mean, before I took senior status, I was regularly having appearances, audio, and I actually had a trial with a young man who was hospitalized with very, very serious injuries, and he testified from his hospital bed by agreement of the parties. So, and that was, pre-COVID, over a year ago. So yeah. I think it absolutely will translate. I think that even when we get past this dark time, and we hopefully move past it as a country and as a community and as a state, there's still going to be people who are particularly vulnerable that might benefit from all of this technology that we've had to put into and advance pretty quickly, so that we can take care of those people too going forward when we get past all of this.
Sure. Yeah, one of the things, Abbas, that we and Judge Togliatti alluded to it earlier, insurance representative, for example, even before this COVID crisis, we're under strict travel restrictions, and now it may even be more so. And now, with all the experience and the technology that we have, we can bring those people into the room much more comfortably. I think, as everyone has adapted to this.
Yeah, and I was going to kind of get into this later, but I think it's a good transition since what you just said. One of the advantages that I see in these mediations being virtually is that one of the issues I always had mediating in person is that the adjuster always had to start going to the airport at 2:00. We just started. I barely got a number from you guys. I know you got to go to the airport. So now that they're in their house drinking wine, I'm like, you're not going anywhere.
Right.
So that's for sure.
So I guess like that leads me to the question is like, obviously it's been a horrible time for the country as a whole, and everybody wants to get back to normal. But I think we've learned some important lessons along the way and learned to do things maybe a little bit differently and outside our comfort zones. So what do you think from the virtual process is here to stay in a hybrid situation, or things we'll continue to use as we move forward in the legal community?
I think I would reemphasize the use of this for particularly vulnerable persons in our population, for maybe the cases that Paul's talking about, international. I actually, before the COVID, I had a Canadian citizen who couldn't travel here on a pretty big case, and as a litigant. And so, I think those cases are, probably the things that appear most obvious. I think as we go forward, if we're going to continue to use this medium for our work, there's, and I've been thinking about it, and you and I and our neutrals, like Paul, will talk about this going forward, I'm sure, but trying to come up with a way to be a little more efficient when we're using interpreters. That is very, that's challenging when you're in person.
Yeah.
And so, but I really think anybody that wants to use this technology can do so. And, maybe if they have a particular client that either needs more in-person contact for whatever reason, maybe they have some intellectual deficits, maybe they have, they really want to hear more from the mediator than a video can bring. There can be a million reasons, but otherwise, for a bulk of cases, I think that lawyers might be asking to use this process through the video medium for a long time.
Yeah, as a neutral, Abbas, I was the one usually the most insistent that parties be present. Yeah, sort of the model. That's the best way to affect a resolution, is when all the decision makers are in the same place. And now I recognize that I don't have to be that insistent upon somebody who has restrictions. That I no longer have to fear that somebody's going to be located in Minneapolis and not in Las Vegas if I can make a video and audio connection with them. I've learned a lot through this process, and for that, I'm actually, thankful. Obviously not for the virus, but for the opportunity it's given me to enhance my technological skills and to sort of come off my high horse a little bit about whether parties absolutely have to be present. That will always be my preference, though.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's, we've learned a lot in the things that you kind of laid out, and I know that we're going to have some cynics, because there's a flip side to that coin, right? Because if someone doesn't have to travel from Texas or Minnesota or wherever they're located to come to Vegas to participate in this, one, there's always, because they have to make that effort, there's always a chance that they're going to settle before the fact. Or if they're going to come, they're going to be more serious about it. And, I think it's going to be a fine line about that. But I think on the whole, being positive about it, I think you guys are right. And for the most part, I think, everybody is beginning to, well, not everybody, but most people are beginning to change their attitude towards it. And so what have you found were the biggest hurdles of virtual ADR? And what do you foresee being the main hurdles of in-person ADR under the current restrictions that we have in place?
Well, I think that, like I previously mentioned, I have struggled a little bit. I've had several cases with interpreters that, make the process a little bit more tedious, as far as because the way the video and audio works, you can't really have contemporaneous interpretation, right? You have to have consecutive. And so depending on the complexity of the matter and the level of dialogue that needs to occur between the litigant and the neutral, or the litigant and their client, I think that's been a hurdle. That's definitely been a hurdle. I think that the hurdles that I see for actually coming back to the office under what is, generally seen as the CDC guidelines and what our governor of our state expects, and is recommended for everyone to stay safe. People might not love the idea of wearing a mask. You see that in stores, you see that in different areas of our community where some people are comfortable with it and some people aren't.
Yeah.
And so I think that's, potentially a hurdle, not because of their personal preferences, I guess.
Sure.
Paul?
So the hurdles to the virtual mediations and arbitrations, for that matter, are basically threefold for me. The first two are personal. I don't like seeing myself on camera. That's one. So that's off-putting to me. The second thing is I have to be very careful if I choose to do them in my home office where I am right now. I have to be sure that it's reasonably clean, and at least what's being projected behind me or what is behind me is acceptable, and I haven't left out McDonald's sacks or something. But the last one is I did experience some difficulties in what I call papering up the deal. At the end, once you've worked hard throughout the day, and normally it's just putting together a memorandum of understanding, some points of resolution that people are going to sign off on. That has presented some things. Most of the lawyers and the parties that I've worked with, when that occurred, they were like, "Look, we'll memorialize it and CC you on the email." Ourselves, and that generally works. And then there are other instances where I'm like, no, I need to oversee somebody signing right now. I don't want anybody thinking about this overnight or even in the next 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So I become more proactive in that. As far as reopening the office, I agree with Judge Togliatti that it's going to be awkward, but we improvise, we adapt, and we overcome. And we'll get through this. We'll be fine. And the neutrals we're going to do our part. And we hope that everybody will work with us as we work with them to try to keep realizing the same success that we've always realized.
Hooah! No, finally, before we call it quits, so I'm really enjoying this particular session. If anything, do you think that there's anything that litigants can do differently to prepare for virtual or, COVID-19 in-person mediations, or than they would have, maybe have done, pre-COVID? If that question makes any sense.
It does make sense, and it's a very good question. I'm trying to think how their preparation would be different. We've all been proponents of please come prepared. Please talk to your clients about our process and about sort of expectations coming in and so forth. Those will always remain. A special preparation, I guess it's just preparation for the things like when you show up at ARM, they're going to take your temperature. You need to wear a mask. Please bring one, and a litany of other precautions that we're taking to keep people safe.
Yeah. What about you, Jen? Do you see anything that being different?
I don't. I think that there are things that we do different. I think I agree with Paul as far as my introduction and my kind of preliminary conversations with litigants has been had to be altered a little bit just so that we could have that time. I think that it's important for the litigants to know, and I've been doing it. It's interesting. You would think that everybody knows Zoom and everybody knows Skype, but I actually had a litigant before I got to it. I have a settlement conference spiel, for lack of a better term, that I do to give them an understanding of what's going to happen. And before I even got through it, one of the litigants said, "So is this being recorded?" And I think, I realized, early on, I have to go to the very basics to reassure these people, look, when I'm in the room, it's not, this is confidential. When I leave the room, I can't hear you. I can't see you. You can have private conversations, and, just simple things that seem very simple, but are actually very important.
Yes, I agree. I think something that Paul mentioned a little bit earlier, I actually think the virtual system has been enhanced the skill sets of the neutrals over what it did for the litigants, because it really makes the neutrals have to go through the ABCs of mediation, like pre-mediation telephone calls. If a mediator got lazy, like, and maybe not made all their pre-mediation calls, they would be able to get through it when it comes to the mediation. But it also makes it almost makes it a necessity to go through that process with this system. And I think, you get to catch some of the issues earlier on than should you have not made those pre-mediation telephone calls. And that's just one small example. I feel like the neutrals are like having to be a little bit more on their toes and sharper and, enhance their skill set a little bit.
No doubt.
I would agree.
Exactly. So anyway, we're kind of coming up towards the end of it. Any closing remarks? I've really enjoyed this conversation. So thank you both for being here, by the way.
Look, I'm sure I speak for all of your neutrals when I say the staff here has done a remarkable job in adjusting, just like we've talked about, everybody's had to do. They haven't missed a beat. And for that, I know I'm very thankful. And, I'm thankful that you have given us the opportunity to do business in a manner that we're comfortable with. And I appreciate that. And I think, I think it's been an exceptional job by ARM.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Yeah, I agree. Our case managers have just done a phenomenal job of keeping us looking good, as I say. A lot of the technical issues behind the scenes, they're handled very, very effectively. And past that, I would just say that anybody who's watching this podcast or listening to this podcast going forward who have mediated with me, I thank you for your patience, and those who will follow your patience with us. But we're actually doing pretty darn good in my opinion. And this is coming from the guy that at the outset of this podcast said, I had some real reservations, and I expressed them to Abbas.
Yeah, I echo your comments about the staff. They've been exemplary. We've come up with plans and have executed them from the bottom to the top of the company and vice versa. I really would commend them. I'm very proud of them. And, I'm so happy that we have the personnel that we have on board. But also, I really want to thank you guys, the neutrals, for getting on board with the plan and, being real team players. And it's taken a lot of teamwork. So thank you for that. And I mean it. And the viewers and the listeners, we use the Blue Jean system. If you're unsure about the technology, feel free to call our case managers. They'll talk you through it. We also have a educational YouTube kind of class on the Advanced Resolution Management YouTube website where you can watch it, and it will talk you through how it works. But again, feel free to call, and our staff will help you. In the interim, please stay safe. Please stay healthy and put your health above anything else. And we wish you all the best from ARM. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Abbas.